Well, thank you all for coming out. Dennis, it's a treat to be here with you. We kind of know each other. We traveled together with Secretary of State James A. Baker III between 1988 and
1989 to 1992.
Yeah, all 750,000 miles together, and not a single free mile from the U.S. government. So. Dennis has written a great book. Nobody gets out of here alive without buying it. So let's just be very clear about that. Statecraft 2.0. And, but it's called 2.0, Denny, because you did an earlier version of this in 2007.
Right.
Let's just start. What prompted you to write the 2.0 version?
Right. When I wrote the first one, it came out in 2007. I really wrote it in 2005, 2006. It was a different world. It was a unipolar world. This is a multipolar world. It was a unipolar world. The U.S. had no real competitors. Russia was still weak. It was still 2 years away from Putin beginning to declare a different posture. China, as you know, at that point, was still trying to, in a sense, take advantage of being admitted to the World Trade Organization. They were advancing, and the last thing they wanted to do was to challenge the United States. So internationally, we had no peer. Domestically, we also had a consensus on what our role in the world should be. Was there a debate on Iraq at the time? Absolutely. But nobody questioned, should the U.S. lead internationally? Today, we're constrained internationally. We have a competitor like China, unlike the Soviet Union, which is not only a military power, but an economic power. And domestically, we don't have an agreement on what our role should be. So I felt, all right, the world is different. If we're going to sustain a leadership role, which I believe in, even though I have a chapter where I talk about the different arguments in schools about what our role should be, I believe we need to continue to lead, because in a world where the U.S. doesn't lead, things become a lot less stable, a lot less predictable, more chaotic. But the only way I knew that we could lead is if we were more successful. To be more successful is a way to sustain your policy, to get the domestic basis to sustain your policy. And to be successful in foreign policy, you have to use all the tools at your disposal. Statecraft isn't synonymous with diplomacy. Diplomacy is one tool. It's one tool of statecraft, but the military is another tool. Intelligence is another tool. Information and how you manage information is another tool. Soft power is another tool. There's a whole panoply of different tools that you have in a toolkit, and you have to be able to integrate them and use them effectively. And so this was an argument, okay, we need to be good at statecraft. As the first few chapters point out, we have not been good at statecraft. And this was designed to be a guide to say, the world's changed, our power is different, but if we implement statecraft effectively, know how to integrate all of our tools, we can be successful and we can sustain domestic support for what we need to do.
It's interesting, something else happened in 2007, actually a bunch of things, but the most important thing is this thing called the iPhone came out in 2007. Twitter launched in 2007, Facebook launched in 2007, Airbnb launched in 2007, Big Data launched in 2007. There was actually a fundamental technological inflection point that happened as well at the same time as our unipolar moment ended.
Which was another way of redefining the meaning of power.
Right, exactly. Right. That's right. The power shifted from top down to much more horizontal, so it was all part of that moment. Your cardinal rule, Denny, in the book is that the mistake that those who fail to lead always make, and the reason those who succeed, who are successful, is that they marry ends with means.
Right.
That would seem to me just such a basic thing, that you marry your ends with your means.
Yeah.
How could it be we get that wrong so many times?
It's funny you ask the question that way, because I teach a course on this, and I always start off the first day, I say, okay, the key to good statecraft is to marry objectives and means. Obvious, right? A given, right? Why wouldn't you? And the answer is we very rarely do it. I cite a whole series of historical examples. Why? Multiple reasons. Number one, oftentimes we get into a situation, we have no clue about what we're really getting into. You look at how we got into Iraq, we had no understanding of the situation we were getting into. A lot of times because you just don't have the expertise, sometimes it's a function of having an ideological worldview that basically has you exclude the facts of the data that you need. That explains a lot of why we got into Iraq. People who had a feel for it were excluded from any of the decision making. So sometimes you just don't understand what you're getting into, or you have an ideological set of blinders. Sometimes you adopt objectives for purely political reasons. When President Obama adopted two objectives related to Syria, one was Assad has lost his legitimacy and has to go. Okay, the objective is he has to go. Well, what were the means he was prepared to apply? The answer is almost none, because he saw Syria as being another Iraq, but he wanted Assad to go. Why? Because there were political pressures, increasing political pressures. What are you going to do? He keeps killing his public. So what are you going to do? So the answer was, he's lost his legitimacy, he has to go. Politically driven, but there's no set of means that were adopted to allow you to do that. Same with the red line on Syria. He was at a press conference, and he says, if we see them moving chemical weapons around, that would change my calculus. That would be a red line. But it wasn't thought through. Again, partly politically driven, partly not thought through. And that's kind of another dimension of this. Sometimes we adopt objectives because we haven't thought it through at all. Sometimes we adopt objectives at such a high level of generality, like motherhood and apple pie, there's no way to operationalize it. So what
would be an example of that?
I would say a lot of what President Trump has laid out as his objectives. They're not really...
Whatever do you mean?
I know this comes as a shock. No, when he's...
Seriously, what would be a good example of that?
Look, a good example of adopting objective at a really high level of generality, he's going to make peace in the Middle East. Okay, even before we have what emerged yesterday, he's going to make peace, he's going to bring peace in the Middle East. Okay, so what are the means you're going to bring to the table to do that? It's a highly desirable objective.
Right.
And look, I'm the last one to say you have to basically limit your ambition. But if you're going to marry objectives and means, if you have an ambitious objective, one of the things you have to do, you say, okay, look, our aim over time is the following. But now we know we can't achieve that, so we're going to act to change the conditions or circumstances so what's not possible today can become possible over time. It requires more of an instrumental approach, right, even as you think through what the objective is. Sometimes, by the way, you start with one objective, you have more success than you anticipated, and it translates into you decide to redefine it. George H.W. Bush, who was actually quite good at statecraft, we went into Somalia in 1992 just to address a food crisis, a humanitarian crisis. We put 25,000 troops in to help ensure that food would be delivered. You look at Gaza and delivery of humanitarian assistance, but there was nobody there to actually do it. George Bush says, we're going to go ahead and we're going to deliver this food assistance. We were highly successful in it, and then he thought, well, you know what? There's this warlord named Hadid in Mogadishu, and unless we deal with him, we're not going to really solve this food crisis over time. But once he did that, you went from just dealing with a humanitarian crisis to putting yourself in the middle of what was a civil war. That was a totally different reality. We hadn't thought it through. We didn't have the means. But it was a result of having an initial objective that fed a sense of such success that you redefined the objective. So that's another fact. There's a lot of, in other words, you don't think through objectives, you might have ideological blinders, you don't understand what you're getting into. Sometimes you start in one way and you transform it into something else that isn't achievable.
Well, one of the things I most admired about George H.W. Bush and Jim Baker was, and you deal with this in the book, is German unification.
Right.
And talk about that a little bit, why that was, because that was really difficult. People forget, Thatcher was against it, Mitterrand was against it. I mean, there was a lot of European opposition. You're reunifying Germany. Right. Okay, people forget. So and so talk about why they were successful, and then I'll tell you a story that I never told you.
Okay, well, it's good, because you were along every step of the way with us. Yeah. You also recall how much we traveled.
Yes.
I'm going to get into that, but I want to explain, even to add to what you're asking about, why it was so difficult. You were asking the Soviet Union to accept the outcome of the Cold War, where two Germanys become one, and their Germany they lose, and the one Germany not only becomes ours, but becomes part of the NATO alliance.
Yes.
So there's no way to sort of sugarcoat it. We win, they lose.
Yeah.
All right? Our entire bureaucracy in the State Department, meaning the European Affairs Bureau, was dead set against this, said you can't do it.
Really? I didn't remember that. That's interesting.
Yes, they were. So they said you can't do it, don't go for this. The intelligence community, the same. The NIO,
National Intelligence
Intelligence Office, when you're in Washington, you fall victim to the acronym. So he said, no way can Gorbachev accept it. But Bush and Baker believed you cannot have Germany floating between these two alliances.
Yes.
If you have Germany floating between the two alliances, the only way they're going to get their security is with a nuclear weapon. Suddenly, Germany becomes a threat east and west, and you're recreating all the sources of instability in Europe. So they said, no, we have to produce this. And he had a small team, as you know, which I was a part. And what we focused on was, all right, we have got to be able to give Gorbachev an explanation. We have to show we're not imposing this on him. We have to show he's part of it, number one. So we created a process called the 2+4, the two Germanys plus the 4 occupying powers of Berlin. So nothing is being imposed on him. Secondly, we had to construct a package that would also show what he was gaining from this, how NATO was changing, so it wasn't a threat. In a sense, what we were doing was we're going to say to you, we're going to give you an explanation. But at the same time, we also had to convince them, look, you don't get to play around with this because this is a train that's moving and you can't stop it. Now, part of that was real. The Germanys were going to unify. That was a fact.
Yeah.
We weren't going to stop them from doing that. So we had to be on the right side of that. We had to get Chancellor Kohl, we had to convince him that we were so much on his side that we could help produce the Soviets in a way that was acceptable to him, so he needed to rely upon us. You're quite right. Thatcher was against it. Mitterrand was against it. Thatcher said at one point to us, Gorbachev is going to achieve in peace what the Nazis couldn't achieve in war. So we were dealing with a pretty hostile environment from the Europeans. We had to bring them along. The way we did it was through a combination of, one, we framed the issue from the start. If you recall, November 9th, you've written about this, November 9th, 1989 is when the wall comes down. We came out the next day with 4 principles to guide how to think about this issue. And basically they reflected the Germans have to have a right to unify, but they need to do it gradually. They need to do it in a way that respects the 4 powers, and they need to do it in a way where borders don't change. So this became a framing for the issue, and everybody was responding to us. An important thing about good statecraft is take the initiative, frame the issues, you be the one who defines the objectives and have everybody responding to you. And then you have to carry this out in a very intensive manner. Baker met 30 times in less than a year with Shevardnadze all around the world. You know because you were on the plane. Right? Bush met 9 times with his counterparts. Every time we were traveling and we were going to a capital, we met not only Baker's counterpart, we met the leader. This was designed to also help give them certain explanations in public of how we were working with them. We let nothing to chance. And we were constantly briefing. I'll tell you one example. We were in Moscow in February of 1990. There was a Central Committee plenum at the same time. Those within the party apparatus who were very angry at what Gorbachev was doing in Shevardnadze, they were taking it out on them. They came in to see Baker, and I was with him, and they're complaining about what has to be done, and Baker's explaining, here's how we'll address your needs. We go through a whole give and take with them. At the second day of this, we had done what we were going to do in Germany. We had to deal with START issues, arms control, arms reduction issues, and other bilateral issues. During that meeting, I wrote a briefing memo from Baker to Kohl, because Kohl was coming to Moscow. I laid out in that memo, here's what Gorbachev is going to argue. These are the arguments that Baker has made in response that seem to have the greatest impact. Here's what you can expect. That was sent before we left Moscow, before he arrived. He sends a note to Baker afterwards saying, you can't imagine how much that helped me in the meeting. Now, it wasn't just that we were helping him in the meeting, we were cementing his ties to us.
Right, yeah.
So he wouldn't go off in a different direction. So this was a kind of nonstop effort. We focused on where we had leverage, how we could apply it. We left nothing to chance. Every time there was a potential problem, we moved quickly to preempt it. We had back channels. We had a speech that Shevardnadze gave in June after we thought we had agreed on just about everything. And the speech was a walk back on everything. There was a guy named Sergei Tarasenko he was my back channel. I walked over to him ready to explode, and before I could explode, he said, "Don't worry, Dennis, we haven't changed anything. We need you to completely reject everything in that speech. This was dictated in the Politburo. Gorbachev decided, we'll show these guys this can't work, so you really have to come back hard on this." So you can see how we even
the orchestration of it, yeah.
Yes, we worked with it as a team.
So my memory of that moment, I was on all those trips, but I remember the last one, which was 1991. We're in Moscow at the Foreign Ministry to sign the 2+4 treaty,
Right.
which was a document that ends both World War II and the Cold War,
Yeah.
and reunifies Germany. And there was the U.S. Secretary of State,
Yep.
there was the Russian Foreign Minister, there was the French and British foreign ministers, because they were signers of the post-war deal, and the 2 German foreign ministers, so 6 of them up there.
Yeah.
And for such an august moment, it was a very small room. Gorbachev presided. It was really just us and the press, and they gave us, wait for it now, mimeographed copies of the treaty. You know, and I have no idea what possessed me, but after the ceremony was over and they signed the treaty, there was just one document. I stood by the side of the stairs, and I got each foreign minister to sign my mimeographed copy of the treaty. And I missed one, and Baker got it for me. And so I actually have the only other signed copy of the treaty ending World War II and the Cold War. And I actually Googled it once, and there's a thing from the German Foreign Ministry. It was lodged, the original thing is lodged in the German Federal Archives, and it says it's the only one. And I said, not really. So someday I'll have to auction it off. You know, listening to you, Dennis, so I can't help but, and we could turn this whole evening into a Trump, thing, and it's really shooting fish in a barrel. But let's go to this peace plan that was announced today, because all I'm thinking of is he's fired most of the NSC staff. Yeah. The State Department's been completely sidelined. Yeah. Like, who is actually what does it actually take to take a outline like this, and turn it into a concrete deal? And is there any infrastructure even there? Yeah. Except New York real estate investor and his son-in-law. I mean, it's such a far cry from the team that Baker and Bush assembled. Can you do it?
Well, let me break it into parts. I'll illustrate what's required by just describing some of the things that have to be negotiated. Some are, I would say, purely political and policy. Some are highly technical and military. First of all, one of the things that you're going to have to work out is what's the phase of withdrawal? How do you define withdrawal on the Israeli side? The way this is set up...
Withdrawal from Gaza.
Yes. According to the 20 points, the 20 points basically say there'll be 3 phases of Israeli withdrawal. There'll actually be a 4th phase. The first phase is to an agreed point, and it's basically the same agreed point that you had at the time of the ceasefire in January. Mm-hmm. The second one is not defined, but it's not complete. And the third one is kind of to the perimeter, but within. There's a buffer.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you have Arab forces coming in. You have Israel there. What are the circumstances under which the Arab forces come in? What do they need to know? What do they need to know from the Israelis? What kind of behavior do they require from the Israelis? The Israelis then know, where are you coming exactly? Who's the liaison to do that?
Yeah.
At the same time is going on.
These could be Indonesian troops. They could be Italians. I mean, people not familiar with the lay of the land in the least.
There'll be the Emiratis will be part of this. And they have been in there with bakeries and field hospitals. And by the way, people hadn't paid attention. They were providing security for the bakeries they set up there and for the hospitals they set up. They will be part of it. But there will be others who have no experience and don't know the area at all, don't know Palestinians at all. So there's a lot that needs to be handled there. Another immediate problem will be, once this is agreed, okay, once you have it nailed down, I expect Hamas to say yes, but.
What will be the but? Then we'll continue.
Well, the but will be, they're going to raise questions about how rapidly the Israeli withdrawal will take place. They'll raise questions about the release of the Palestinian prisoners. And there are 250 prisoners with blood on their hands and 1,700 who have been detained who are going to be released. Who gets released when? That has to be sorted out. The question of the assistance. The assistance is supposed to go back to what it was with at least 600 trucks a day.
Food assistance.
Who's managing that? By the way, who's going to manage the distribution of that? The problem all along is that Hamas was seizing, or armed gangs were seizing and monetizing the assistance. Who's responsible for that and the security? Every part of this requires a negotiation. Some requires highly technical people to come in. So military to military, that's not part of the current team. It's going to have to become it. Who sets up? They're going to be there. You're going to have this council. And the council will be made up of people from the region and outside. The CEO is Donald Trump. He made it clear he didn't want to do this, but he's going to do it.
What could go wrong? Yeah.
You ask.
Yeah.
Tony Blair will probably be a central figure in this. Who's going to take part in that? What exactly are their responsibilities going to be? Underneath them is going to be the equivalent of ministries or working groups with experts both outside the region and Palestinians. Who's selecting them?
Yeah. Just the orchestration of all of this. It reminds me. When I give foreign policy talks now, I always start by saying I want to address all the parents in the audience. Mom, Dad, if your son or daughter come home from college and say, Mommy, Daddy, I'd like to be Secretary of State one day, tell them, honey, anything but that, okay? You can be Secretary of Agriculture, Commerce, Health and Human Services, but promise Mommy and Daddy you won't be Secretary of State. Worst job in the world now. Why? And I want your reaction to this because you kind of lived it. Let's think of 2 October wars. October 1973, October 2023.
Yeah.
2 Secretaries of State, Henry Kissinger, Tony Blinken. So Henry Kissinger, 1973, needed 3 dimes, an airplane, and 3 months to produce the 1973 disengagement agreements. He needed a dime to call Golda Meir, a dime to call Hafez al-Assad, the president of Syria, a dime to call Anwar Sadat. 3 months, his plane, Kissinger magic, and he produced the equivalent of what I would call tic-tac-toe, 3 across, Egypt, Syria, Israel. Fast forward, October 2023, Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken saw double everywhere he went. He had to deal with inside Hamas and outside Hamas, military Hamas and political Hamas. In Lebanon, he had the Lebanese government, Hezbollah, and Iran. In Syria, he had Iran, Hezbollah, Russia, and the Syrian government. In Yemen, he had 18 tribes. In Israel, he had 18 parties. So he wasn't playing tic-tac-toe.
Right.
He had a Rubik's Cube, and he was trying to get all the colors aligned on one side of a Rubik's Cube. Could the best person today, Denny, do this job, let alone Trump, who really has no State Department, no NSC staff, because it's such a different world now.
It is. But take a look at what I was describing that Baker did. He wasn't dealing with just the reactors.
Yeah.
He was dealing with
Europe especially, yeah.
He was dealing with a multiplicity. By the way, in Germany, you had a chancellor of one party, you had foreign minister of another. We had back channels to the chancellor and to Genscher, the foreign minister. So we had a multiplicity of actors we had to deal with. We had two Germanys at the time.
That's right.
So it can be done, but it takes a team effort. It takes a recognition of 2 things. One, You have to build channels direct and informal. You have to have back channels all the time.
Interesting.
You have to have somebody in each of these places who you have a channel that isn't exposed, where there can be...
Why is that so important?
The problem in all of this is if you expose issues prematurely, you produce a backlash. You take away the political space. Someone's going to make a hard decision. They don't want to make that hard decision before they've lined up all their ducks. So you have to work with them in a way that makes it easier. This is a long book. One way to summarize parts of it. The key to good diplomacy is you take away excuses for why something can't be done, and you provide an explanation for why they're doing it.
That's
okay?
Take away excuses, provide an explanation.
So even in this sense, even what Tony Blinken was dealing with, he had one major advantage which we continue to have. Nobody else can do it. You know, I'll tell you a story. In the beginning of 2005, I went into Gaza. This is during the second Intifada. And I had been invited by a guy I knew well, Ziad Abu Amr, and he invited me to what was then the Gaza Council on Foreign Relations. And I went in and I spoke to about maybe 300 Palestinians, including, by the way, the leaders of Hamas who were there, unbeknownst to me, until I saw them. And I basically said to them, you have this unique moment. In 48, the Arabs said, we'll take care of it. When we were at Camp David, Arafat said to me, I wanted to go to the first Camp David, but the Soviets and the Syrians wouldn't let me. So I said, you have a unique opportunity. You turn Gaza into a going concern, and not only the international community, but even the Israelis say, okay, we can do that in the West Bank too. But you turn it into a platform for attacks against Israel, and no one's going to say, let's take that Fayal model. Now, nobody in the audience, who were not shy, no one wanted to take that on. Instead, they want to say the U.S. isn't an honest broker. So I said to him, you know, for the last 4 years, this was when Bush came in, and you may recall he walked away, didn't replace me. Yeah. Not that I was not replaceable, but he didn't replace me, basically said there's no such thing as a peace process. So I said to this audience, you know what? For the last 4 years, you haven't had an honest broker, a dishonest broker, an effective broker, an ineffective broker. The U.S. hasn't been a broker at all. Did the Europeans come in and take our place? Did the Russians come in and take our place? Did the UN come in and take our place? Nobody came in and took our place because there's nobody who can play the role we play. So the key to being a broker is being an effective one.
Well, let's just double click on that for a second. This deal that was announced by Trump yesterday actually bore a great resemblance to the deal that Biden's team, Tony Blinken and others, forged, during the transition.
Absolutely.
Why didn't they get it through? Does that say something for Trump, the fact that he got it through and Democrats did? Are Democrats weak?
Not that that's a leading question, but now I'll explain it, because there's an element to this that is important to understand. It is almost sociological, and that gets to the issue of the question of weakness or strength and what you convey. This was something that was worked on for a whole year before the transition. The moment that was when it should have been concluded should have been in the summer. Once you got close to the election, it was going to be very hard for the Israelis or the Emiratis, who were the key to this. Others were involved, but they were the key to this. Once you got to the election, they were going to wait and see, well, who wins? They were not going to conclude this. The point of maximum leverage that the U.S. had was being able to say, you don't know what comes next. I mean, I was kind of informally involved. And I would go and I would say, you don't know what comes next. You need to do this now when you know you have something that you can live with. But we didn't do enough. And why didn't we do enough? And this gets to the heart of your question. The logic of leverage is something that almost sociologically you either are inclined to apply or not. Too often, too many Democratic administrations think that somehow if you're really leaning on the other side, you're going to force them away from you, as opposed to understanding that there is no such thing as diplomacy that is ever effective without coercion and leverage. No one is ever going to respond to you because they like you. No one is ever going to respond to you because they want to do a favor for you. You get others to respond, even allies to respond, when they realize there's a cost in not responding. Now, leverage can be negative and positive. You can create inducements at the same time. You can make it easier. That's also what I mean by explanations. But the fact is, if they know they have something to lose, they're more willing to respond. We didn't during the Biden administration. There wasn't enough leverage applied. And then during the transition, everybody was looking at Trump. So why did Trump succeed? Bibi can't say no to Trump.
What does that mean?
What it means is if Trump says you got to do this, we have Exhibit A yesterday. It wasn't just, by the way, it wasn't just the plan. It was the phone call to the Qatari prime minister.
Yeah, that was really the teacher in class telling Billy he had to make up with Paul. You know, I mean, it's just like
I got a phone call here. Oh, here.
Yeah,
I want you to say. Now,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Go back when Israel carried that strike out. What did the Prime Minister of Israel say? He was glowing with the significance of this and how great it was, and no one was ever going to tell Israel they couldn't strike anyone wherever they needed to. There'd be no impunity, there'd be no sanctuary.
Tell the audience exactly what you're talking about. People might not know.
All right, so when Israel struck Doha, they tried to take out, in Qatar, they tried to take out the political leadership of Hamas. They had intelligence that they were all meeting in one room. And they may well have been meeting in one room, but the building they struck and the weapons they used weren't sufficient to take out where they were. So they failed in this. They did not kill any of the Hamas political leadership.
But they killed a Qatari security.
They killed a Qatari security guy, and they killed the son of the lead, basically the lead Hamas official they wanted to get. And they've killed a few other functionaries for Hamas, but they didn't get any of the Hamas leadership. Now, the whole Arab world, and especially the Gulf Cooperation Council states, all reacted. There was a summit, they all came, Arabs and even the Iranians and Turkey, all condemning what the Israelis did. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was emphasizing with great, in his strongest possible posture you can imagine, no one is going to have a sanctuary from us. And what does he do in the phone call yesterday? We will never do this again.
That's a good
now, this was Trump.
Yeah.
Now, Trump has leverage for a couple of reasons. One, I'll give you the political reason first. With Biden or with Obama, Bibi could always go to the Republicans, and he could count on their support, and he could count on turning this into a wedge issue. With Trump, can he go to the Republicans? No way.
Interesting.
And he already has opposition to the Democrats. So he doesn't have political leverage with us. With Israel itself, what Trump did, even though the Israelis made it possible for him to do it, when he hit Fordo, Isfahan,
Iran.
And Natanz, the most important nuclear infrastructure sites, Israel had hit all of them except Fordo, which is an enrichment site built into a mountain. When he did that, that also made it really hard. Bibi puts him on a pedestal, and then he says he's done what no other American president has done. Now he's going to turn around and say no to him?
Right.
Don't think so. So for political reasons and because of what Trump has done, he can't say no to Trump. And we saw an unbelievable demonstration of it yesterday with the phone call, even more than accepting the 20 points.
So I'm sure a lot of people here would like to know, how do you think this is going to play out? Is there anyone there who can practice diplomacy 2.0?
Well, I think one thing this administration will have to do is it will have to build a team. The team will have to be, one of the things I talk about in here is sometimes you need to create an all-of-government effort, meaning every agency, not just the State Department, not just the Pentagon, Treasury, Intelligence, the Agriculture Department.
Right.
You need a full whole-of-government effort. And usually you need a driver of that. So President Trump presumably can mandate it. Someone has to be there to drive it for him. He has a Secretary of State who's now also his National Security Advisor. Maybe he empowers him to say, Secretary Rubio, Marco, this is now your task. You pull every agency together. Look, you have huge amounts of rubble that have to be removed. You have huge amounts of bomb ordnance that has to be basically disarmed. You have recovery, rehabilitation, this whole panoply of putting these ministries in place, having a stabilization force. Who's going to bring that all together? You know, this council will create a kind of executive, oversee a kind of executive function, but they're going to have teams in every functional area. Who runs water? Who runs electricity? Who runs health? Who's going to create finance? Who's going to create commercial activity? All of that is necessary. It can't, this isn't something where you say, go do it and it gets done. It won't happen by itself. You know, I would say this is the closest thing to what was done in German unification.
Yeah.
Or even in terms of, look what Baker did in terms of putting together a coalition on Iraq. Again, nonstop efforts with a team that had a fair amount of experience in terms of how to do this. You're talking about the what and the how. So if you ask me, can it happen? It can be done. If you ask me, it can be done. One of the reasons it can be done is one of the really interesting, potentially positive things here. We've never had the Arab states assume a responsibility for Palestinians. Never. They use it as a slogan. In the 1960s, they used it as a club to beat each other over the head with and compete. They were afraid of Arafat. We couldn't get him to pressure Arafat because Arafat was going to stand up and say, they're pressuring me to betray the Palestinian national cause. And there wasn't an Arab leader that was prepared to stand up and do that. Now, there isn't a Palestinian leader today who can say that. Mm-hmm. And you have different Arab leaders, especially in the Gulf, who actually have who have legitimacy. And they have a different agenda. And their agenda is, you know what? We want to be leaders in the world. You know, in alternative energy, in AI. We want to be leaders. And we can't be leaders if this conflict goes on and drags us down. That's different. That's a remarkable opportunity. To be fair to the Israelis, they changed the landscape militarily. They have dramatically weakened those who could have intimidated those who want to make peace. There's this interesting kind of similarity to 1991. When we defeated Saddam Hussein, suddenly you had Arabs who no longer had to fear the radicals.
Yes.
But they weren't, even though they were more prepared to challenge the Palestinians because Arafat had chosen wrong in the war by backing Saddam, there were limits as to how much they could do because this is really, you have Egyptian-Israeli peace, but you don't have anything else. We break the taboo on talking directly to the Israelis, but you look at where we are now, you have a different baseline. Ending the war is the key to beginning to be able to move on it, but this has to become successful. And if it is successful, and you have this opportunity, then it can feed on itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had a rule which I wrote about today in the Middle East, and it applies to Netanyahu because I was really struck when they didn't have a press conference, when they didn't answer questions. And my rule is that in the Middle East, whatever people tell you in private is irrelevant. All that matters is what they say in public in their own language to their own people. It's just the opposite of Washington. In the Middle East, people lie in private and tell you the truth in public. And in Washington, they tell you the truth in private and lie in public.
Yeah.
You know, so when I see these people actually go home to their own constituencies now, I think that's going to get really, really interesting.
Can I, just to build on this, Tom, to prove the point, you look very carefully at what Bibi said, and there was a statement that was made by the Arab foreign ministers. They each emphasized in the 20 points what they wanted to emphasize.
Talk about that. How so?
So the Arab foreign ministers' points emphasized the end of the war. To their credit, they talked about hostages, they talked about security, they talked about humanitarian assistance, they talked about Palestinian statehood and peace. The word Hamas never appeared. The word disarmament never appeared. Bibi, what did Bibi talk about? Against Palestinian state, even though there is language in the 20 points that is new, that actually for the first time talks about self-determination. If there's reform in the Palestinian Authority, this can create the conditions for a path that leads to self-determination and Palestinian statehood. That's never, the word self-determination never appeared before. Bibi says, I'm against the Palestinian state, you know? And Trump says, I understand your opposition, but it's in there. Bibi talks about disarmament. He talks about none of this happens until Hamas is disarmed. Hamas is disarmed, and Bibi says no Palestinian Authority, but the Palestinian Authority is in there. So each is basically addressing what is easier for them to justify. And what that highlights for me, if I were the negotiator right now, the first thing I would be doing is I would be saying, okay, we're going to go and normalize our understanding of what these 20 points are. Before we do anything else, we're going to reach a common understanding on what these 20 points are.
Interesting, interesting. Any chance you think that'll happen?
I'm not holding my breath, but I do, look, I do think the minute that Tony Blair and Jared Kushner came into this, it became more practical.
Yeah.
So I think there's some potential, but as I said before, they really have to build out a team. And I think if they build out a team, there's a potential, because the reality is Bibi in the end wouldn't have done this. He knows he needs a way to end this.
Yeah.
And the Arab states want this ended.
Yes, those two poles make.
You have to start. You know, I always say when in a mediation, I wouldn't bring the parties together until I'd identified points of convergence. There's a fundamental point of convergence. So it gives me a reason to think this can be done. I'm not pessimistic right now.
You're realistic. I mean,
yeah, I would say I'm not optimistic, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Okay. A few questions from the audience, Ted.
Sure.
One flows from this. Once the war in the Middle East ends, God willing, is there anything Israel could do to regain its lost credibility?
Yeah, that's a really important question. When you look at the poll in the New York Times, you've seen a dramatic change here, and we've already seen the change internationally. Yeah, I would say, A, there will have to be a different Israeli government. I mean, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have to be gone. B, Israel has to focus on its brand. In a way, Israel was a startup nation. It was a source of attraction. I talked about soft power. Israel had enormous soft power because of what it was cutting edge in everything. It attracted others because of it. Look, this is a country that has technologies to grow wheat and rice, which are water-intensive crops. And it now has a technology to cut by 2/3 at least the water that's needed to grow these crops. You want to feed the rest of the world in a time of climate change, drought, and the like, this is the Israeli brand. You have Israel out there showing all the things it can do for humanity. Look, even today, in India, Israel is present helping with Indian agriculture in most of the governance there. But nobody knows it. You need to give it visibility. So you need to change the Israeli brand to start with, and you also need Israel. The virtue of this plan is Israel can be demonstrating, look, we're prepared to produce an outcome where there's really, we respect the Palestinians, we accept that there has to be a coexistence, we're prepared to do our part. A different government that can say that explicitly and not be overly defensive and not be constantly acting in a way that devalues what they're saying, and focusing on this brand. And in this country, go to Israel. When you go to Israel, you will see a lot of black Israelis. There's a lot of prominent Ethiopians who came from there in Israel. You have the progressives, the activists here who look at Israel and say white supremacy, injustice. They have no understanding of what Israel is and who makes it up. There ought to be Israeli delegations that come here, and they ought to go to state capitals and to cities. And, there are leading Israelis who came from Ethiopia who are doctors. Let them be part of these delegations. But I would start with the brand, remake the brand, and focus on this in a way where you expose that brand in a way that you saw it before.
This is a really important question. Will your book be on sale in the lobby afterwards? And will you be signing copies?
I'm absolutely prepared to sign any copy that anybody wants to buy. I think it is.
It is.
Yes, it is in sale out in the lobby, yes.
How do you know that the world will be unstable if America isn't leading it? It's a question.
We've seen what happens when we're not there. Look, I will grant that if the United States doesn't stand for something, that doesn't contribute to stability internationally. If we're going to be defined only by narrow self-interest and everything's a transaction, well, then we don't stand for much, and we aren't a pole of attraction. We have competitors internationally who, in a lot of ways, are also predators. Now, you look at Russia. To be fair to Biden, if he hadn't organized with the Europeans a response to what Putin was doing and support for the Ukrainians, I would have liked to actually seen more. But could Russia have succeeded sooner? My guess is probably yes. As brave as the Ukrainians have been, if they had gotten almost no support without being organized from the outside, one of the things the administration did very well, the one thing the Biden administration did that was a whole of government effort, it was Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We did organize the Europeans. We organized a logistic train to be sure that weapons got there. We organized what was the financial assistance as well. So here was the U.S. acting in the way that no one else could have pulled everybody together. So, you leave, if someone like Putin knows there's no one who's going to prevent him, look what he's doing already. I will say, we've seen something pretty significant. The reality is, Putin didn't challenge any of the NATO airspace. There wasn't one effort, one accident into any NATO country that was providing all the assistance, the actual ground assistance.
During Biden's tenure.
During Biden's tenure.
Yeah.
2 weeks after the summit, now we have drones in Poland. Now we have aircraft in Estonia. We have another penetration in Romania. That's the world you'd be looking at.
Dennis, one of the things that Trump in that famous Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, said not only that you don't have any cards, but he basically at one point said Zelensky was a dictator, and he said that Zelensky started the war. And one of the things that Steve Witkoff has often said is that it's only when we came in that we really started talking to Putin, and how can you deal with someone if you don't talk to him? I remember we went to Kyiv with Baker, and you had a special interaction back there that I think is relevant for people to hear right now.
So Baker at one point sent me to Kyiv in 1992 after Ukraine had declared independence. And I was part of a small delegation of 3 people. And we saw President Kravchuk at the time. And we had multiple reasons for being there, some related to how they're going to organize themselves, civil-military relations and the like. But the main mission was to say, look, in the Soviet Union, there were 4 republics that had nuclear weapons. We don't want these now 4 independent states. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. That would be proliferation.
Which were they?
Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Russian Federation. So we wanted the 3 outside of Russia to turn their nuclear weapons over to Moscow, so you'd only have 1 nuclear weapon state. Kravchuk said to us...
Then the Ukrainian president.
Yes, at the time. Kravchuk said to us, okay, you're pressing us to do something and you don't understand the Russians. I'm telling you, first they'll go after Crimea, and then they will go after Donbass. This was when Yeltsin was president. Now, we lacked the imagination because Russia was so weak at the time.
Yeah.
And we gave, but the truth is we didn't do it. We came back, we discussed it, we decided, it was 1992, we decided we had other things on our plate. We weren't going to press them to do this. We still thought it was the right thing to do, but we also understood we were going to have to give a very different kind of set of commitments. In 1992, an election year with a president who was seen as being only a foreign policy president, the idea of assuming new responsibilities and commitments really wasn't on the table. When the Clinton administration came in, and I was doing Middle East things then, not this, they made the decision to go ahead and conclude that initial discussion. They produced something called the Budapest Memorandum, in which we and the British and the Russians gave commitments to Ukraine that in return for their turning over their nuclear weapons, we gave commitments on their security, the territorial inviolability of Ukraine, And obviously, those were paper commitments. So if you are Zelensky, a paper commitment isn't going to cut it. You know, maybe we couldn't have imagined, and the Clinton people couldn't imagine how weak Russia was and it could become stronger later, but we've now seen this. And we've also seen during the Minsk process in 2015, Putin made commitments, none of which he lived up to. So there's a legacy here. Paper commitments that were only that, commitments that he violated himself. So if there's going to be assurances, security assurances, they have to be tangible, practical, they have to be on the ground. There need to be forces on the ground. And there needs to be a consequence. I would, by the way, personally, even now, I would be turning over some of the frozen Russian assets, yeah. $300 billion, for reconstruction in Ukraine. I would reserve some as a penalty for later on, yeah. If Putin weren't to live up to this, or at some point he'll have a successor.
Dan, before we finish, what do you say in Statecraft 2.0 about how to deal with China? Hard problem, serious yeah. country with real weight.
Yeah. And as I was saying before, unlike the Soviet Union in the Cold War, not only a military competitor,
but also an economic competitor.
An economic competitor, and obviously a huge competitor across the board in high tech, and yeah. especially AI. I would say, first of all, your objective here needs to be how do you manage a competition so that that competition doesn't spill over into hot conflict. And I would say the key here is to recognize you're going to have a competitive relationship, but can you structure the competitive relationship in a way that you emphasize those areas that you're going to cooperate? One of the things I suggest in here is kind of twofold. One, in every meeting, have an agenda that starts with the issues on which you cooperate. Don't start with the issues on which you compete. Create a habit of thinking about, you'll approach the issues of competition through the lens of, okay, here are the things that we're cooperating on. That gives us more of a stake to manage the competition. So create an agenda, and what are the areas where you should cooperate? You have written on the need to have an understanding with them on AI, not as a favor to them, but as something we need, and the truth is something they need. I think the same on climate change. Even though this administration thinks it's a hoax, the reality is unless we and the Chinese are cooperating on climate change, we're not going to be able to address it. I see the same on pandemics. They should have learned through their experience. They tried to do everything unilaterally. It came back to bite them in a big way. So I think pandemics is another one. I think terrorism is another one. Anyway, there is AI is the big one to start with, but I think all of these are areas where we need each other. No one's giving anybody a favor, and you're not conceding something. So start with the areas where you have a common stake. I'll give one other example of this. In 2009, Obama sent me to China to talk about Iran. And I went there and I said to them, really interesting set of meetings, including with the head of military intelligence. And I said, look, you may think that we can control the Israelis, but if you think that we can stop the Israelis from striking Iran if they're facing what they see as an existential threat, you're dreaming. Now, we both have a common interest in preventing a war there. And if we don't do something serious to impose a real price on the Iranians for what they're doing, the Israelis will not be convinced. They'll feel that they have to go ahead and act. They think that Iran can be pressured into giving this up. So we have to prove that we will apply the kind of pressure that's meaningful. This is a common interest. They agreed to do sanctions. We had a Security Council resolution in 1929. They went for sanctions they'd never gone before. So here's an example. You can take an issue where you have converging interests and turn it into something, even as you will compete on other things. But there's the value is that you create a habit of operating that way. And the one other thing I would say is you have a real back channel. I come back to this issue of back channels. You know, Kissinger, one of the unfortunate things that we've lost with Kissinger no longer being on the scene. Kissinger was a channel to the Chinese in the years for every administration after he was out. And he could go and he could talk to them with no publicity. They could trust that. They took him seriously, but also because they looked at him in a more favorable way. It helps to have a back channel who is credible with those who you want to engage. But in a back channel like that, you not only can try out ideas, you can hear, look, if you do the following, that's a real problem for us.
Yeah.
You know, I helped to create a back channel. I mean, to be fair, it sort of existed already, but I reinforced it. Actually, between Arafat and Rabin. And Rabin would use it. You know, he would say, look, he would go to Arafat and say, I'm going to have to do the following, and I know it creates a problem for you. Tell me what I can do that will minimize it. By the way, that built enormous trust of Arafat and Rabin. You know, when Rabin was assassinated, he was, and I talked to him, he was genuinely mourning. So these back channels can create relationships that allow you to test out ideas, but also to anticipate problems and say, all right, here's how we'll deal with the problem. And if you have to do something, all right, here's what we'll do to ameliorate it. And here's what we'll require from you.
So we have to end, I'm going to end with a question, hypothetical. Donald Trump has been listening in on our conversation tonight. And he's decided, he's so impressed with what you've said and your background. He calls you up and says, Dennis, I want you to be the coordinator here of this whole process. What would you demand of him if you were going to take that job?
Okay. What I would demand of him is you have to give me complete authority. I have to be able to come to you. I have to be able to marshal every single department. If I say this is what I need, they have to provide it. If I don't have the authority, I can't do this job. The key to these positions always are having the authority to act. People used to ask me when I was Clinton's negotiator, does Clinton always know what you're doing? I said, he always knows what he's doing. Sometimes before I do it, sometimes after.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Dennis, thank you so much.
Thank you.